All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're ready to start in the matter of Petrina v. Martini and Peony Estates. Do we have participants for the plaintiff and the defendant to take up pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor.
The defense is ready, Your Honor.
All right, for the plaintiff, Mr. Jones, what pretrial issues would you like to address at this time?
Permission to make appearances before the court?
Yes, certainly.
Good afternoon, Judge Gazewood. My name is Peter Jones, and I'm joined here today by my co-counselors, Miss Maya McCollum.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Mr. Ryan Mulligan.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Together, we represent the plaintiff in today's action, the estate of Genesis Petrina.
Excellent. Okay. And what pretrial matters do you have, Mr. Jones?
The plaintiff would like to invoke Rules 603 and 615, which respectively call for the constructive swearing in of all witnesses in today's action and the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, of course, barring party representatives.
Okay, and just for the defense, any objection to that request?
No, Your Honor, we would just like to designate Harper Martini as our party representative. She's the defendant in today's case.
Okay, thank you. Back to Mr. Jones, any other pretrial issues?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to direct your attention to a pretrial order in today's case, which my co-counselor will share on the screen.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Today, the plaintiff is pursuing a claim of battery, and an element of that claim is to establish harm. But the specific harm that the plaintiff must establish is actually defined in this pretrial order by Judge Galuzzi. It says, plaintiff is further admonished that the harm it must establish in trial is death. However, other injuries incurred by plaintiff may still be relevant on other grounds. Finally, we'd like to direct your attention to two stipulations in today's case.
Okay.
Specifically, stipulations 3 and 4. Stipulation 3 reads that exhibits 1 through 10 are pre-admitted, and both parties have stipulated that all pre-admitted exhibits may be used or referred to during opening statements, and the plaintiff does intend to use one of these exhibits during their opening.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Stipulation 4 tells us that exhibit 11 is pre-admitted as well, since the plaintiff will be calling Mr. Lonnie Paris to the stand today.
Okay.
And with that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Okay, turning to the defense. First, well, let me take appearances from the defense, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Fernando Izquierdo, and I'm joined alongside my co-counsel, Mr. Zachary Parada.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
We'll be delivering our opening statement, and Miss Abigail Branham,
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
who will be delivering our closing argument. And we're representing Harper Martini, the defendant in today's case. Ms. Martini, if you will.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Now, Judge Gazewood, we do have a few questions about Your Honor's preferences, if we may.
Okay, well, first let me get your response to the request about the battery claim and to plaintiff's request about the battery claim. Any objection to their request?
No, Your Honor. We're ready to pursue. We're ready to defend against battery, Your Honor.
Okay, and then any objections or any information that I need relative to stipulations 3 and 4?
No, Your Honor. Just pursuant to stipulation 1, all exhibits have been pre-marked in today's trial, and we'll be referring to them to their pre-numbered labels instead of the order in which they are admitted.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Izquierdo, other issues that you would like to address, please?
Yes, Your Honor. We intend to stand during statements and cross-examinations. However, we do intend to remain seated for direct examinations. Is that all right with Your Honor? Of course, we mean no disrespect.
That's certainly acceptable. Thank you.
And Your Honor, given those pre-admitted exhibits, we do intend to share our screen. Should we ask for permission before screen sharing, or should we just announce for the record that we are sharing our screen?
You can just announce for the record that you're sharing your screen, and if there is an objection, the plaintiff can lodge an objection. Same with the defense. If plaintiff wishes to show the screen, once the screen comes up, if there's an objection, just say so.
Of course, Your Honor. And regarding objections, can we safely assume that all objections are heard outside the presence of the jury?
Yes, we can.
And if an objection is sustained, should we move to strike or assume that testimony stricken?
You can assume that the testimony is stricken. If you require more of the, if you're looking for a greater request than just to strike the objected to testimony, please articulate that.
Of course, Judge Gazewood. And one last thing, the plaintiff, as you've heard, is alleging a claim of battery, meaning that they are alleging that Harper Martini intentionally poisoned a 2019 car wine that was drank by the decedent, in this case, Genesis Petrillo. We're willing to stipulate, if the plaintiff would also be willing to, that Genesis Petrillo did die of pesticide poisoning from ingesting that 2019 car wine.
Okay, let's hear from Mr. Jones. Is that an acceptable stipulation or any objections to that stipulation?
No objections, Your Honor. However, we would like to maintain that issue for today's case. It is an element of the plaintiff's burden to establish that harm. So even though it's been stipulated to, we ask that evidence about that cause of death still be relevant here tonight.
Okay, Mr. Esquerda, any objection to the request that plaintiff be able to present evidence relative to that factual matter?
No, Your Honor. Actually, the defense also intends to argue how that pesticide entered that 2019 car wine bottle. So that's fine with us.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, Your Honor, I apologize, Your Honor, go ahead.
Oh, no, any other issues with the defense?
No, Judge Gaze, we're ready to proceed with opening statements.
Okay, excellent. Let's hear from the plaintiff. I believe that for the plaintiff, Mr. Mulligan will be delivering the opening statement.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. You can proceed.
Judge Gazewood, Mr. Parada, members of the jury. On June 7th of 2019, the defendant, Harper Martini, had a problem. Her daughter, Casey Soto, was going to be married the following morning. For any other parent, that would be an occasion to celebrate. But the defendant does not approve. You see, the defendant despised her daughter's fiance, Genesis Petrillo. The defendant was scared that when her daughter married Miss Petrillo, she'd never get to see her again. So the defendant was desperate to stop that wedding. The evidence will show the defendant begged, threatened, even bribed Miss Petrillo, but when Miss Petrillo refused to break off the wedding, the defendant turned to poison. There was no price the defendant wouldn't pay. You'll hear today the defendant had access to pesticides. The evidence will show the defendant mixed those pesticides with a bottle of wine. You'll learn she served that bottle to Miss Petrillo. By the following morning, she was dead. That's why we've brought a claim of battery against the defendant. Today, we're going to prove that the defendant mixed pesticide with wine, did so with the intent of poisoning Miss Petrillo, and that as a result of her actions, Miss Petrillo subsequently died. We're going to prove this to you by a preponderance of the evidence. What that means is we'll show that it's more likely true than not that the defendant committed battery. And we're going to meet this burden because the evidence will show that to preserve her relationship with her daughter, there was no price the defendant wouldn't pay. You'll hear from the defendant's daughter, Miss Casey Soto, today. Miss Soto is going to tell you about this voicemail. Miss Petrillo sent this to the defendant just a month before the wedding. She told her that her daughter would be moving to Paris. She told her that her daughter, her future grandkids, her family would live as far away from her as possible. Miss Petrillo told the defendant she would die alone and no one would care. When the defendant realized her daughter would be moving out of Midlands, out of the country, and out of her life, she knew she had to stop that wedding. You'll hear from an investigative reporter, Mr. Lonnie Paris. Mr. Paris will tell you that the defendant gave Genesis an ultimatum. She told Genesis to leave Casey, otherwise she would take her out of the picture the hard way. You'll hear the defendant made good on that threat. You'll learn today that when Miss Petrillo refused to stop the wedding on June 7th, the defendant took a bottle of wine, a canister of pesticides, and snuck into a private room. You'll learn she served that same bottle to Genesis that very evening. Those pesticides were what killed her. You'll hear from Dr. Kwan, the attending physician. Dr. Kwan will explain that he found pesticides in Miss Petrillo's stomach, that those pesticides were mixed with the wine that she drank, that wine came from the bottle the defendant had given her. There was no price the defendant wouldn't pay. That's why at the end of today's trial, my colleague, Ms. McCollum, will ask that you find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. And for the defense, Mr. Parada?
Yes, Your Honor, just give me one moment. Can you see and hear me okay before I begin?
Yes, thank you. And
May I proceed?
yes, thank you.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. The plaintiff just told you that Miss Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning and a bottle of wine. We agree. But this case, it isn't about what Harper Martini did. It's about what Peony Estates, the company that produced that bottle of wine, didn't do. And because you'll learn today, members of the jury, that they were threatened by a flood of pests. They cut corners and the regulations that were intended to slow them down. And when they did, they put their own profits over people. But today, instead of seeking justice for Peony Estates' negligent actions, they're charging Harper Martini with civil battery. And for you to find her liable of that, they have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that she acted with the intent to harm Miss Petrillo and that her action was the direct and proximate cause of her death. And if they can't prove each and every one of those elements to you, or more likely than not, you're going to find Miss Martini not liable at the end of today's trial. And keep in mind, members of the jury, the defense, we don't have that burden. We don't have to prove a single fact to you or call a single witness, but you're going to hear from three. And you'll learn from them that Peony Estates, they put profits over people. First, as you go through today's case, you have to remember, it's about intent. If they can't prove that the Harper Martini intended to hurt Miss Petrillo, this case is over. And you're going to hear from Harper Martini herself that she didn't intend to hurt anyone. The only thing Miss Martini intended to do in this case is make her child's wedding perfect. And you'll learn how badly she wanted to make that wedding perfect from Blair Osborne, the wedding planner who also attended the wedding rehearsal dinner. And you'll learn that Harper Martini shelled out tens of thousands of dollars and hours making her child's wedding perfect, obsessing over every detail. But members of the jury, if Harper Martini had no reason to stop that wedding from happening, you'll wonder why it did. Well, you'll hear that Miss Martini was so obsessed with every detail of that wedding that she left her business, Peony Estates, in the hands of its head winemaker, Austin Lewis. And you'll learn that Harper Martini, she trusted Miss Lewis to follow the rules. But instead of following those rules, she threatened her employees with layoffs. So they cared more about what went into their pockets than what got into their wine. They sprayed pesticides in the same room as that bottle of Cara wine. They put profits over people, just like you and me. Members of the jury, after you've heard all the evidence, my co-counsel Abby Branham will come before you. She'll remind you that Peony Estates, they put profits over people. And she's going to ask you to find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Let's turn to our first witness. I think it's Ms. Soto. Mr. Mulligan, if you'd like to begin your direct examination.
Yes, Your Honor. We would like to call Ms. Casey Soto to the stand.
Thank you.
May I proceed?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Could you please introduce yourself for the members of the jury?
And my name is Casey Siobhan Soto.
Where are you from, Ms. Soto?
Well, I'm originally from Dublin, but I moved here to Midlands when I was a wee girl.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a jewellery designer. That's what I went to school for.
Ms. Soto, how did you know Genesis Petrillo?
She was my fiance, but she died in 2019, the night before we were supposed to get married.
I'm very sorry for your loss, Ms. Soto. How did you first meet Genesis?
We met in a pottery class in university. I was an art major and Jenny was just there for the credits, but neither of us really took the class seriously. I was always trying to make her laugh. I told her Genesis sounded a wee bit biblical, if you will, so I started calling her Jenny.
Ms. Soto, how do you know the defendant in this case, Harper Martini?
Harper's me mum.
What was Miss Martini's relationship like with your fiance?
It was always a bit tense.
What do you mean when you say tense?
Well, from the moment they met each other, they just didn't get along. They were always arguing, always going at each other, always calling each other names. It drove me mad.
Ms. Soto, what did you do?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
What did you do, Ms. Soto?
I just wanted them to get over it. I stopped seeing me mum as much. I thought maybe if they weren't seeing each other as much, then they would stop arguing. So I moved in with Jenny.
When you moved in with Genesis, did your mom say anything?
She did. She called Jenny a distraction. She told me to break up with her. She told me she wanted Jenny out of our lives, but I knew I wanted to marry Jenny. I loved her.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about your engagement. When were you and Genesis first engaged?
In 2018, Jenny proposed and I said yes, of course.
Did that engagement impact your mother's relationship with Genesis?
It just got worse. They were seeing each other all the time because we were planning the wedding, and they were just always arguing. Always calling each other names, and I was just trying to keep them apart as much as possible.
Ms. Soto, what did you do? How did you intervene?
I tried to talk to him. I tried to calm him down, but then I just ended up arguing with the both of them. Eventually my mum would just start yelling at me. She'd tell me that she wanted Jenny out of our lives, that I shouldn't let Jenny break up our family. She told me that I needed to cancel the wedding.
Were there any particular fights in the month leading up to the wedding?
There was one really bad one that I remember. It was about Jenny and I moving. We were supposed to move to Paris after the wedding because Jenny had gotten a job there, and Jenny decided to call me mum and tell her about it, and she said some really nasty things.
Would you recognize a transcript of that voicemail if I showed it to you?
I would, yes.
Your Honor, we will be displaying Exhibit 8, which is in evidence.
Thank you.
Ms. Soto, is this that voicemail?
It is.
What did Genesis say in this highlighted portion?
She says, Casey, me, our future kids, your grandkids, we're all going to live our lives as far away from you as possible. You'll never see any of us.
What was the last thing that Genesis said in this voicemail?
She said, you'll die alone at that sad place and no one will care.
After your mother played that message, what happened?
I started crying. I was really upset with Jenny for having told me mum like that. And my mum was she was beside herself. She was so angry. She was screaming at me. She was throwing things. And
Question of speculation, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. The objection is speculation, Mr.
Yes,
Perrott?
Your
Okay, Mr. Mulligan?
Yes, Your Honor. The witness was just testifying that she saw her mother throwing things, that she was, if I may make an offer of proof,
Yes, please.
that she actually said things to Genesis that would suggest she was angry with her. This is certainly not speculative because she's perceiving how her mother's behaving. It's within her rationally based perception to make that assessment.
And Mr. Perrott, and any response?
Yes, Your Honor. These things are still the witness speculating. They can talk about the conduct that Miss Martini exhibited, and they can talk about whether or not they thought she was angry. But the question counsel asked led to the answer, rather, that she was angry. That she was angry is still delving into her state of mind, Your Honor, and it is inadmissible pursuant to Rule 602.
I understand the objection. I'll allow the response, given that it's the rational perception of the witness. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Soto, after your mother played that message, how was she acting?
I mean, she was screaming, she was throwing things, she was yelling at me that I had to cancel the wedding. She said that if Jenny tried to take me away, she would end up 6 feet under.
Ms. Soto, I know this might be difficult, but I need to ask you about June 7th, the day of the wedding rehearsal. How was your mother and Genesis acting on that day?
They were still arguing. I mean, I was hoping they would have gotten over it at that point, but they were still just going at each other.
Soto.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation as to the insinuation that they had not yet gotten over it.
Okay, Mr. Mulligan, any response to the objection?
Yes, Your Honor. This witness was talking about her perceptions of that day. She said that the two of them were still fighting, that they were still calling each other names, that they were arguing, and certainly it's a rationally based perception to say that they were still mad at each other and hadn't yet smoothed anything over.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, arguments aren't myopic. You can argue about more than one thing, Your Honor. Just because they were arguing does not mean that they were arguing about that subject. And for the witness to state, or rather insinuate to the jury, that they had gotten over it is speculating into their mindset, Your Honor. And it's inadmissible pursuant to Rule 602. It's not a lay opinion that has been sufficiently foundationally laid pursuant to Rule 701, Your Honor.
At this point in time, I'll grant the objection, but counsel can continue with this area of inquiry, and provided you create a foundation for the question.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Soto, on June 7th, how was your mother acting towards Genesis?
They were still arguing. I mean, my mom was still just calling Jenny names, insulting her.
Did you talk to your mother at all that day?
I did. I mean, I was just trying to calm her down, but she was begging me to cancel the wedding. And she said, Casey, you have to cancel the wedding. And I just kept telling her no. I mean, I said, this is the last time I'll tell her, but I'm marrying Jenny.
When was the next time you saw your mother that day?
It was a bit later that night at the rehearsal dinner. I mean, I was surprised she came at all, given everything she'd said to me.
Ms. Soto, did your mother do anything?
She did. She gave a speech, and she had this bottle of wine with her, and she was talking, and then she went over to Jenny, and she looked at her and she said, "This is for you," and she gave her the wine. I mean, I don't know why she would have done that.
Did you see if Genesis drank from that wine bottle your mother had given her?
I did. I saw her drink it.
When was the last time you saw your fiance that night?
It was a bit later on, after the speech, as I was going up to bed. We were planning to spend the night apart since it was the night before the wedding. So I just gave Jenny a kiss and I went up to bed. And that was the last time that I ever saw her.
What happened the following morning?
I was just getting ready and someone came in and told me that Jenny was in the hospital.
Soto, what did you do?
I went straight to the hospital. I mean, I was in a panic and I didn't know what to do, but I had to be with Jenny. I mean, I wanted to tell her I loved her, that it was all going to be okay, but by the time I got to the hospital, Jenny had already died.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Soto. Your Honor, no further questions.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, please do.
Good afternoon, Ms. Soto.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Soto, I understand how hard this must be for you, okay? So if you need a break at any point, just let me know, okay?
I appreciate it.
Okay, now, Harbor Martini, she's your mom, right?
Yes,
And you always thought your mom really cared about
I did. I mean, she's my mum.
you. You always thought your mom wanted nothing but the best for you.
Objection, speculation.
A response, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
This goes directly into the witness's own mindset. I'm asking about what Ms. Soto thought. Moreover, Your Honor, this is a lay opinion pursuant to Rule 701 because, as the witness has already explained, Ms. Martini was her mother, continues to be her mother, and raised her for most of her life. And so, Your Honor, she would have sufficient foundation to establish that she wanted nothing but the best for her, or at the very least, that was her opinion.
Response?
Any response, Mr. Mulligan?
Yes, again, Your Honor, pursuant to 701, there needs to be foundation on the record to establish that this witness had perceptions that would lead her to believe her mother actually did want what was best for her. Surely what her mother wanted for Casey isn't what Casey would have wanted for herself. Those two things don't always match up or align. And so for this witness to testify that her mother in fact wanted what was best for her, well, that would require her to speculate unless opposing counsel can lay some foundation.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes, very brief.
Your Honor, opposing counsel contends that we haven't laid foundation on the record to establish this, but we just did with the prior question in which we asked about whether or not she believed her mother cared about her, to which the witness responded, yes. That is sufficient foundation to establish, additionally, Your Honor, that she wanted nothing but the best for her, at least in her opinion. And if she disagrees with that statement, she's allowed to, Your Honor, but will impeach.
Okay. I'll allow the question in this area of inquiry. Please continue.
Yes,
Would
Your
you like me to repeat that question, Ms. Soto?
Yes,
And you always thought that your mom wanted nothing but the best for you, right?
that's what I thought.
In fact, your mom actually funded tens of thousands of dollars for your wedding, right?
She did offer to pay for it.
And she hosted it at her business.
She did.
And your mom, she told you she was planning on taking pictures of that wedding, right?
She did. She thought they might be good for the publicity.
That's right. She wanted to advertise it.
That's what she said.
And your mom, she even said she would make sure that your wedding had no issues that would hurt her business's reputation.
No, she said something like that.
So that's yes to my question. She said that exact statement, correct?
Yes.
Now I want to move on to the day of the wedding rehearsal dinner, okay? During that rehearsal dinner, some people made toasts to you and your wife, right?
To me and my fiance, yes.
Yes, and your mom, she was one of those people.
She was.
She grabbed a microphone.
She did, yes.
She brought your fiance forward.
She did. She took Jenny and they went up.
She made a big show of it.
She did.
And after she made a big show of bringing your fiance forward, she gave her a bottle of wine.
She did. I'd never seen that wine before.
And she gave it to her in front of everyone there.
She did.
She wasn't trying to keep it a secret.
I don't know.
It wasn't a secret exchange.
Excuse me.
It wasn't a secret exchange, correct, Ms. Soto?
I mean, I was there. There was other people there.
And you didn't see her trying to hide that bottle.
No, she took the bottle and she gave it to Jenny.
And that's right. When she gave it to your fiance, she showed off the label on that wine, right?
She did.
At this time, Your Honor, we're screen sharing what's already been entered pursuant to stipulation 3 as Exhibit 2B.
Thank you.
And that's the label on that bottle of wine, right?
Yes.
It says it's a bottle of 2019 Cara wine.
It says that at the bottom.
And your mom, she told you she was planning on releasing Cara wine to the public just after your wedding.
That's right.
And I want to be clear for the members of this jury. This label, it advertises her business, doesn't it?
Well, it says Peony Estates, and me mum owns Peony Estates.
That's right. And after she gave your fiance that bottle with that label on it, your fiance brought that wine bottle back to your table.
She did.
And she poured 2 glasses of it.
She did. She drank some. She poured some.
And let me be clear. You don't know who those glasses were for.
I don't know.
And Miss Martini, she didn't try to stop your fiance from pouring those glasses, did she?
No, I don't know what she was doing.
She never told you not to drink it, did she?
No, she never said that to me. I was going up to bed.
And you never saw your mom put any pesticides into that bottle, right?
No, I never saw that, no.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Any redirect?
There's no redirect, Your Honor. We just ask that Ms. Soto be excused.
Okay, Ms. Soto, you're excused as a witness. Plaintiff, if you would call your second witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Lonnie Paris.
Thank you.
May I proceed?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the court? Looks like you're muted there, Mr. Paris.
I'm so sorry about that. The 21st century is really catching up with me. I was trying to say that my name is Leonard Paris. Nice to meet you. Hope you're having a good day.
Thank you, sir. Are you currently employed?
I am. I currently work as an investigative journalist.
What type of investigative journalism do you do?
I've worn many hats in my time. Back in my golden years, I used to travel abroad, reporting on things like foreign wars and insurrections. These days, though, my joint pain really keeps me off planes, so I've been sticking to the Midlands area and the businesses I find there.
And sir, have you ever investigated the Peony Estates winery in Midlands?
I have. A few years ago, I received a tip. So between July of 2018 and June of 2019, I conducted an investigation there.
Mr. Paris, do you know who the defendant, Harper Martini, is?
Yes, I do. Miss Martini owns Peony Estates. I've heard her on tours at the place. I've been in her office, seen little notes she writes. I even found her MySpace page from a decade ago. I didn't know those things still existed.
And sir, do you know who Genesis Petrillo is?
I do, yes. Genesis was engaged to Miss Martini's daughter, Casey. I really loved hearing Casey and Genesis chit-chat. They reminded me of me and my wife, Gertie, back when we were much younger.
Sir, when was the last time that you visited Peony Estates?
That was early June of 2019. It was the day before Casey and Genesis were supposed to get married.
I want to walk the jury through your visit on June 7th. Where did you go once you arrived at the winery that day?
I headed in for the bottling area.
Sir, when you got to the Peony Estates bottling area, was there anyone there?
There was, yes. I could hear Miss Martini talking to someone in there.
What did you hear Miss Martini say?
She said to keep that bottle separate. I need it for something. I'm going to put an end to this nonsense with Genesis once and for all.
Sir, what did you do after you heard the defendant say that?
Well, I waited till I saw Miss Martini leave and then headed into the bottling area myself.
And sir, were there any bottles inside?
There was actually just one bottle. I believe it was labeled Cara, and it was sitting alone on a shelf.
And about how long would you say you were inside the bottling area?
Just a minute or two, I'd say. Some people started shouting out outside, so I had to scuttle out into the hallway to find a little spot to hide.
Those people shouting, did you recognize the voices?
I did. It was Miss Martini back again, and I could also hear Miss Petrillo as well. They were going back and forth for a couple minutes until they eventually walked away.
And what did you do once the two of them had walked away?
I went over to where I heard the shouting in case anything was there. And sure enough, I actually found a note lying on the ground.
And what did you do with that note?
I took a quick little Polaroid of it.
Sir, did Harper Martini or Genesis Petrillo return after they left?
Yes, actually. After I took the picture, I could hear Miss Martini walking back towards where I was. So I dropped that note I found and scuttled off to hide again.
And did Harper Martini do anything with that note when she came back?
She did. She walked over, picked it right off the ground and said, "I forgot I should get rid of this after Genesis tossed it back in my face."
And sir, did she get rid of it?
Yes, she certainly did. She balled that note up just like a snowball and threw it in a nearby furnace.
I want to discuss the photograph of that note you took a little bit further. Would you recognize it if I showed it in court to you here today?
Yes, of course.
Your Honor, we're displaying what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 24.
All right, thank you.
Do you recognize this, Mr. Paris?
Yes, I do. This is that photo of the note I found on the ground.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of that photo?
Yeah, looks to be in order.
And sir, do you recognize the handwriting that you can see on this note?
Objection, improper opinion. May I be heard?
Yes, please. Ms. Braun?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. We haven't heard any foundation laid throughout the course of this trial, specifically with this witness's testimony, that he's any kind of expert in handwriting. So there's going to be no foundation opposing counsel can lay for him to plausibly tie the handwriting in this note with Ms. Martini's handwriting, whether or not he's seen her handwriting before.
Okay. Ms. McCollum, your response?
Yes, Your Honor. According to Rule 901B2, when it comes to satisfying authentication of a piece of evidence, there are certain things which are sufficient to do so. And what 901B2 says is that a non-expert opinion about handwriting is sufficient to prove that that handwriting is genuine. So we don't need a handwriting expert. In fact, Mr. Paris's lay witness opinion that this handwriting matches Harper Martini's handwriting is sufficient as laid out in Rule 901B2.
May I be heard on those grounds, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
This witness still would not meet that qualification under that rule, Your Honor, because they have not laid the foundation that he's ever even seen Ms. Martini's handwriting before. So at this point, it's lack of foundation at best.
May I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
Yes, just to the lack of foundation. Sure. Thank you.
The foundation was laid earlier in the direct when Mr. Paris testified that he has investigated Harper Martini as part of his investigation. He testified that during the course of that investigation, he went to her office and saw her handwriting then. So the foundation that he knows what her handwriting looks like has already been laid.
All right, thank you. I'll allow the testimony pursuant to Rule 901.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the plaintiff moves Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Ms. Brunham, any objection to the admission of Exhibit 24 into evidence?
Without objection, Your Honor, as this is a statement by their party opponent.
Thank you.
Mr. Paris, who is this letter addressed to?
It says Genesis right there at the top.
Sir, could you read the unblurred portion of this note aloud?
Sure. Leave Casey, and the enclosed $300,000 is yours Otherwise, I will take you out of the picture the hard way.
And sir, this last section, what does this say?
You have until the 7th. Choose wisely. And then it's signed HM.
Could you remind us, sir, what was the exact date that you visited Peony Estates and found this note on the ground?
I believe that was June 7th of 2019.
So, Mr. Paris, after you saw this defendant get rid of this letter, what did you see or do next?
She turned and walked down towards the bottling area, just down the hall.
About how long was the defendant inside of the bottling area?
I'd say she was in there for a few minutes until I saw her walk out.
And when you saw the defendant walk out, did she have anything with her?
She did, yes. She was actually holding that Cara bottle of wine.
Mr. Paris, did you have any opportunity to go back to the bottling area once the defendant had left?
I did. As soon as I saw Miss Martini leave, I went into the bottling area myself.
And sir, when you went back to the bottling area, was there anything inside that you hadn't seen before the defendant had been there?
There was, actually. Sitting alone in the corner was this canister that wasn't in there earlier.
Did you recognize what that canister was?
I did. I've seen a bunch like it all around Peony. It was an open thing of bug-off brand pesticides. Looked nearly empty.
And sir, did you ever see a bottle of Cara wine again on that day, June 7th?
Yes, yeah, I did. Later that night at the rehearsal dinner, Miss Martini actually poured Genesis a big old glass of the Cara wine.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination, Ms. Branham?
Yes, Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes, please, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Paris. I just want to make it really clear for the members of the jury why you were at Peony Estates in the first place. You had received a tip about how Peony Estates was using their pesticides, right?
Yeah.
Somebody called you concerned about consumer safety there, right?
Yeah, some business rival did reach out to me with a tip.
Objection, Your Honor. To hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
We're not offering this statement for the truth of the matter asserted, rather the effect it had on the listener. Based on this tip, Mr. Paris went to Peony Estates and started his investigation.
Okay, I'll allow the question. Proceed.
Yes. Mr. Paris, based on that tip, you went to Peony Estates to investigate, right?
Several years after the fact.
So let's talk about what you found during your investigation. When you got to Peony Estates, you found that they used quite a lot of pesticides, right?
That's what the tour told me, yeah.
And that's because they were located on a swamp.
That's right.
And you knew that an insect infestation would actually eat into their profits there, right?
Objection to hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
There's no hearsay statement that has been elicited at all, Your Honor. I'm talking directly to this witness's knowledge of what an insect infestation would do to a company's profits, in this case, in Peony Estates' profits.
Okay, I'll allow the question. Please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Paris, I'll re-ask my question. You knew that an insect infestation would eat into the profits of Peony Estates.
They certainly could, yes. I'm not quite in the winery business myself.
Well, you know, Mr. Paris, that Peony Estates was dealing with insect infestations, right?
I believe they mentioned bugs on the premises.
And you know that because when you went to Peony Estates, you were attacked by a swarm of bugs, right?
That's right, mosquitoes everywhere.
Mr. Paris, that wasn't the only thing you found during the course of your investigation, because you were at Peony Estates on May 8th, right?
That's correct.
On May 8th, you learned that you were not the only one investigating Peony Estates for how they were handling their pesticides.
What do you mean?
Well, on May 8th, Mr. Paris, the FDA was at Peony Estates too, right?
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance. May I explain?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, if I may refer your attention to the pretrial order that we discussed at the beginning of today's trial.
Okay.
Now, in this pretrial order, which my co-counsel is displaying, Judge Galuza already ruled that Peony Estates was in full compliance with the Midlands Building Code, that the charge of negligence per se that was made against Peony Estates was thrown out. Therefore, all evidence that is introduced at trial today is limited to the battery claim. By trying to bring up FDA regulations, investigations into whether or not they are complying with pesticide storage is not relevant, as has already been established in this pretrial order.
Your Honor, may I respond on those grounds?
Yes, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. McCollum is certainly correct. We are not asserting today that Peony Estates violated any portion of the Midlands Building Code. We have absolutely stipulated to that and know that that has been the summary judgment for this case. However, evidence about whether Peony Estates was cutting corners in their business practice, evidence about whether or not the FDA, a federal law enforcement agency, found that they were cutting corners in how they produced their wine, specifically the wine Genesis Petrillo drank, that's extremely relevant to the reason we're in court today and goes to negate their element in today's charge that Harper Martini had anything to do with how those pesticides got into that wine.
Okay, Ms. McCollum, any response?
Your Honor, this goes beyond just establishing intent or lack thereof. In fact, in defense counsel's opening statement, they said that the plaintiff should have charged them with negligence. They said that they weren't meeting regulations. This is going beyond just showing some type of accidental contamination. No, they're alleging that they broke a law, a different charge than the one in court here today. This is damaging for the jury to hear, as it misleads them into thinking that that's the issue at question, when it's already been established that we should only be bringing things up relevant to battery, not negligence or any violation of these safety regulations.
May I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
Yes, briefly.
Yes, Your Honor. What Ms. McCollum just stated is a mischaracterization of our opening statement. We never mentioned negligence. Like I said, we're not bringing up this evidence to dispute whether or not Peony Estates ever violated the Midlands Building Code, which is exactly what this summary judgment talks about. We're only bringing up FDA citations, investigations, and regulations because they are different than that Midlands Building Code, different than what this summary judgment disallows, and they are relevant to today's case and how those pesticides got into that Cara wine.
I find the evidence to be relevant relative to how the pesticide, as Ms. Branham mentioned, whether or not, the FDA, the FDA violations and FDA investigation is certainly relevant to causation in this matter. So I'll allow this area of inquiry.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Paris, I'll go ahead and ask that question again. When you were at Peony Estates on May 8th, the FDA was there inspecting them too, right?
Yes, there was talks of a health inspection.
You actually read the FDA report from that day, didn't you?
I did.
And before we get into the contents of that report, you know that it contains factual findings from that FDA inspection, right?
I'd certainly hope so.
And the portions you read, you'd agree with me. They're trustworthy, right?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Paris, after reading the FDA report from May 8th, you learned that Peony Estates was storing pesticides in the same room they were bottling their wine.
That's what it said, yes.
You learned that their employees did not know how to properly handle or store pesticides.
Yes, that's what the report said.
You learned that Peony Estates was storing pesticides right next to the Cara wine. Isn't that correct?
That's what it said.
After reading that report, you know Peony Estates failed that health inspection, didn't they?
I believe so, yes. Though when I was reviewing their history, I don't believe they received any citations or anything like that.
But that was a yes to my question. They failed that health inspection.
I think so.
In fact, they weren't allowed to make wine anymore because of it.
I believe so.
That's not the only thing you found throughout the course of your investigation, Mr. Paris, because you also saw this law enforcement lab report. Your Honor, at this time, I'll be displaying exhibits 10 and 11, which have been prior entered to trial pursuant to stipulations 3 and 4.
All right, thank you.
So, Mr. Paris, take a look with me at this report here on the left, exhibit 10. You know this was law enforcement's test of a Cara wine bottle from Peony Estates, right?
That's what it says. River Valley Police Department. Rapid River, I'm sorry, Police Department.
Yes, sir. And it came back positive for the presence of isophynthos. Isn't that correct?
It did, and I believe that was the can they found in the trash, if I understand correctly.
Yes, sir. So you know that Peony Estates pesticides were found in a bottle of their car wine, right?
Yes,
And then, like you testified previously, you were at Peony Estates again on June 7th, the day of that rehearsal dinner.
I was.
And when you were there, you said you were back in that bottling room again, right?
I was.
So if you'll take a look at this exhibit on the right with me, you actually saw in that bottling area a can of opened Peony Estates pesticides sitting right next to that bottle of car wine, right?
No, actually, I saw the can of pesticides in the corner after Harper Martini walked out with the bottle of wine.
Certainly, Mr. Paris, and you agree you sent those pesticides off to be tested.
I did.
That's the exhibit 11 on the right is a result of those tests that you sent off, right?
That's right. My name right there at the top, Lonnie Paris.
Yes, sir. And that test came back positive for isophynthos too, right?
I did, yes.
So, Mr. Paris, you certainly can't tell the members of this jury that you ever saw Miss Martini handling Peony Estates pesticides.
No.
You can't say you've ever seen her even spraying them, right?
No.
You certainly didn't see her dump them into her company's own wine, right?
No, I don't recall anything like that.
But what you can tell this jury is that Peony Estates wine contained the same pesticides that Peony Estates used frequently, right?
The bottle in the trash certainly did. I don't really know about any other kinds of wine there.
Thank you, Mr. Paris. I have nothing further at this time.
Thank you. Ms. McCullum, any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. May the witness be excused.
Yes, thank you for your testimony, Mr. Paris.
Thank you.
Plaintiff, your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Dr. Kwan to the stand. May I proceed?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Kwan?
I'm the chief emergency physician at River Valley Hospital here in Midlands, where I specialize in toxicology.
Where did you receive your education?
I got my bachelor's degree in biology from Georgia Tech, and then I went on to get my medical degree from UNC Chapel Hill.
And doctor, how long have you worked as a physician?
About 23 years now, going on 24. I started in emergency medicine right after I graduated from med school, and I've been doing that ever since.
Doctor, could you please explain your connection to today's case for the members of the jury?
Of course. I was the attending physician on duty on the morning of June 8th when Genesis Petrina was brought into the emergency room.
And do you have some sort of a method for how you treat patients in your emergency room?
I do. As a doctor, data is everything to me, so I try to gather as much information as possible. I start by speaking with the patient and then performing a full physical examination and running any follow-up tests that may be necessary.
Is that a standard method of evaluation, doctor?
Yes, we use it in the emergency room at River Valley, and it's used by emergency medical practitioners across the country.
Did you reliably apply that standard method when you treated Miss Petrillo in the hospital?
I did.
Did you gather enough information to make a diagnosis?
I certainly did.
What diagnosis did you make, doctor?
I diagnosed Miss Petrillo as suffering from organophosphate pesticide poisoning as a result of ingesting those pesticides.
Objection, Your Honor, to cumulative.
Mr. Jones, your response?
Yes, Your Honor. In order for this to be a needless presentation of cumulative evidence under Rule 403, that cumulative effect must substantially outweigh any probative value. Now, there's certainly probative value to what the attending physician diagnosed Miss Petrillo with on the night of June 7th.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, prior to trial, both parties stipulated that Genesis Petrillo died from ingesting pesticide poisoning from that 2019 car wine. The jury's going to hear that stipulation before they go into the deliberation room. So presenting this testimony yet again through the attending physician, it's needlessly cumulative, Your Honor. We stipulated that both parties could argue the evidence that led to that conclusion, but rehashing that conclusion again in front of the jury, it's excuse me, Your Honor, it's a waste of the court's time.
I understand the objection. I'll allow the evidence so long as you keep it relatively brief. It tracks your presentation.
Yes, Your Honor.
Doctor, could you state your diagnosis?
Yes. Like I was saying, I diagnosed Ms. Petrillo as suffering from pesticide poisoning as a result of ingesting organophosphate pesticides. She was exhibiting all the classic symptoms.
What are the classic symptoms of pesticide poisoning?
There are a number of them. I've actually prepared a chart to help better explain this.
Your Honor, we'll be displaying Dr. Kwan's chart for the members of the jury. Opposing counsel's already seen it.
All right, thank you.
All right, Dr. Kwan, so what are the critical symptoms of pesticide poisoning?
Well, there are 6 of them. These are muscle twitching, slowed pulse, low levels of an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase, incontinence, contracted pupils, and excessive tearing of the eyes.
Now, which of these symptoms was Miss Petrillo exhibiting when you treated her?
She was exhibiting all of these symptoms. This was highly concerning to me.
Can you explain why that was concerning, doctor?
Well, it told me that I was dealing with a very severe case of organophosphate poisoning and that the window for treating Ms. Petrillo was closing rapidly.
So what did you do?
Well, I immediately administered the antidote for organophosphates and followed up with a full poisons and toxins analysis.
Dr. Kwan, were you able to administer that antidote in time?
Unfortunately not. By the time I administered the antidote, Ms. Petrillo's nervous system breakdown had already progressed too far, and she unfortunately died later that morning.
Doctor, you mentioned that you were able to conduct a poisons and toxins analysis. Would you recognize that if you saw it here today?
I would, yes.
Your Honor, we'll be displaying pre-admitted Exhibit 6.
All right, thank you.
Doctor, could you explain what we're looking at here?
Yes, this is the results of a poisons and toxins analysis. It's the most comprehensive test the toxicologists use to find the presence of dangerous substances in the human body.
Were there any poisons or toxins in Miss Petrillo's system?
Yes, we noted the presence of isofenphos or organophosphate pesticides in one area of particular concern.
Where was that area of concern?
There were organophosphate pesticides in Ms. Petrillo's stomach. This gave me a better idea of the kind of case I was dealing with.
What did it tell you about this case, doctor?
Well, the pesticides in her stomach, along with the order of the symptoms, told me that Ms. Petrillo must have ingested these pesticides.
Dr. Kwan, did you determine how Miss Petrillo came to ingest pesticides?
Yes, a series of tests we ran showed that Ms. Petrillo ingested wine that contained a lethal dose of organophosphate pesticides.
How were you able to come to that conclusion?
Well, we ran testing on Ms. Petrillo's stomach, which showed that it contained wine that had organophosphate pesticides mixed in. I also reviewed a test of a Caro wine bottle found by the police at Peony Estates, which showed a concentration of pesticides as well.
So, Dr. Kwan, based off of all of your work in today's case, what was your ultimate conclusion of how Ms. Petrillo died?
Again, Your Honor, objection to cumulative.
Mr. Jones, your response?
Yes, Your Honor. At the start of today's trial, we did stipulate that Ms. Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning. But if you think back to when we made that stipulation, we also established that it would still be relevant to talk about how Ms. Petrillo died. And that's exactly what Dr. Kwan's testifying to, the different factors that allowed him to make his conclusion of how Ms. Petrillo died.
Response?
Mr. Scurity, your response?
Yes, Your Honor, that's our understanding of the stipulation as well, and they've done just that throughout the direct examination. Very early on in the direct examination, when I first objected to cumulative, Dr. Kwan already stated his conclusions, and now he's restating them again. This is certainly a waste of the court's time, Your Honor.
Okay, yeah, the objection's well taken. However, I'll allow just the answer to the doctor's conclusions here, but no further inquiry on the topic.
Yes, Judge Gaiswood.
Dr. Kwan, what was your ultimate determination of how Genesis Petrillo died?
I determined that on the night of June 7th, Genesis Petrillo consumed wine that contained a lethal dose of organophosphate pesticides. Those pesticides triggered a breakdown of Ms. Petrillo's nervous system and ultimately led to respiratory failure and her death later that morning.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Kwan. Your Honor, we have no further questions.
Okay, defense cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. And before I begin, Dr. Kwan, I just want to make sure that you can see and hear me all right.
I can, thank you.
Now, Dr. Kwan, it sounds a lot like you and I can agree on a few things. You and I can agree that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning.
Yes, that was my diagnosis.
You and I can agree that she drank those pesticides from that 2019 car wine bottle.
Yes, that's what I determined.
You can also agree with me. There are some things science can and cannot tell us.
Yes, I agree with that.
You certainly can't tell us how those pesticides got into that wine.
No, I cannot. My expertise is limited to how Genesis Petrillo died after she was admitted to the hospital.
You can't tell us when those pesticides got into that wine?
No, the testing that we run doesn't indicate that kind of information.
You can't tell us if Harper Martini put those pesticides into that wine or if Peony Estates accidentally allowed them to get contaminated.
I cannot, no.
But nonetheless, you and I can agree that any amount of pesticide is certainly dangerous.
That's true. Small amounts of pesticide can be very dangerous.
So if a small amount of pesticide was contaminated in that wine by Peony Estates, that certainly would have exhibited the same symptoms Genesis Petrillo was exhibiting.
Well, the level of pesticide does affect the severity of the symptoms, but low levels of pesticide can cause severe symptoms.
But you did just tell us any amount of pesticide, a small amount even, could be dangerous.
It can be, but in some cases, but like I said, the level of pesticide does affect the severity of the symptoms.
Now, Dr. Kwan, there's one more thing I want to talk to you about. We need to talk about your treatment of Genesis Petrillo. She was admitted into your ER at around 1 a.m.
That's right.
And she died at 9:27 a.m., correct?
Yes, that's right.
And to be clear, you concluded that her cause of death at 9:27 a.m., the primary result, was respiratory failure.
Yes, respiratory failure as a result of organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
Right, and just to be clear, respiratory failure means that Genesis Petrillo could not breathe.
That's right. The nerves that connected to her lungs had broken down enough that she could no longer breathe.
So going back to 1 a.m., I want to talk timeline with you. At 1 a.m., you completed your full examination, right?
Yes, right when she entered the hospital, I spoke with her. I spoke with Angel Rodriguez, who had also come into the hospital with her, and then I completed my full physical examination.
Right when Genesis Petrillo was admitted to your hospital, you saw that she was coughing.
That's right.
She was wheezing.
Yes.
You examined her throat.
I did, part of my full physical examination.
And you saw that she was exhibiting bronchospasms.
That's right, yes.
Just to be clear for the members of the jury, bronchospasms mean that Genesis Petrillo's throat was swelling up.
Yes, that's right.
Dr. Kwan, at no point in time during the 8 hours that Genesis Petrillo was in your ER, did you give her an inhaler?
No, that's not an appropriate treatment for organophosphate pesticide poisoning.
Not an appropriate treatment. Dr. Kwan, you just told us her throat was swelling shut.
Right, that would be appropriate for something like anaphylaxis, but in a case of organophosphate pesticide poisoning, the appropriate treatment is to treat the nervous system.
Dr. Kwan, you never even put supplemental oxygen tubes around her nose or her mouth.
I did not. That's also
Genesis,
treatment.
Your Honor, I just asked that Dr. Kwan be allowed to complete his answer to the question.
I apologize, Your Honor. I hadn't realized he hadn't finished.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Now, Dr. Kwan, at no point in time did you put Genesis Petrillo on a ventilator.
No, that was not necessary.
Dr. Kwan, you say it wasn't necessary, but she died at 9:27 of respiratory failure.
Yes, that's true.
Dr. Kwan, you admit you were too late in your treatment of Genesis.
Right, by the time I administered the antidote, the pesticide had already been in her system for too long, and her nervous system had already reached a point of breakdown that was too severe.
But that's a yes to my question. You were too late.
That's right. I wasn't able to administer the antidote until she was already spiraling towards death.
Dr. Kwan, you say you didn't have the time. She was in your ER for 8 hours.
That's true.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any redirect examination?
No redirect, Your Honor. We just asked that the court excuse the doctor.
Okay, the doctor is excused, and we've reached a point in our presentation. Oh, no, any next witnesses for the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. The plaintiff rests.
Thank you. Turning now to the defense. Do you want to call your first witness, or do you want to take a short break?
Yes, Judge Gazewood, we would actually be amenable to a brief 5 to 10 minute recess. We have a little bit over an hour and a half before the trial is supposed to conclude.
Okay, it's currently 12:15. If we can come back at 12:20 to resume.
Your Honor, I believe you're muted, but the defense is back and ready to proceed.
I was just scrolling through our participants. It looks like everyone's here. Judges, can you confirm for me that you're back?
Judge Friday's back.
Judge Lally is back.
All right, excellent. So we'll go back on the record in the matter of Petrillo v. Martini e Peony Estates. We, at this point in time of the presentation, we are to the defense presentation. Defense, do you have any witnesses to call?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
Okay. Let's call witness Martini. Okay, thank you. You may proceed, counsel.
Ms. Martini, before I start, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Please introduce yourself to us.
Good afternoon. I'm Harper Martini.
I want to give you the chance right now to address the accusations the plaintiff has made today. Ms. Martini, did you poison Genesis Petrillo?
No, absolutely not. Look, I couldn't stand that woman, but my company is more important to me than Genesis Petrillo. I would never risk its reputation because I didn't like someone.
Let's talk about your business. What do you mean risk its reputation?
Well, I'm the founder and owner of Peony Estates. I've built this company from the ground up and spent the better part of a decade making it the best winery in Midlands. It's my life's work. Poisoning Genesis with my own wine at my own winery, I mean, can you imagine how little sense that would make? It would have to be the world's dumbest business decision.
Ms. Martini, you said you couldn't stand Genesis Petrillo. I want to be really clear for the members of this jury. What exactly was your relationship with her?
I know how bad this sounds, but we hated each other. I mean, I feel sympathetic for her family. I can't even imagine losing a child. But she had nothing good to say about my company and badmouthed it in front of customers. She continuously disrespected me in front of my own daughter, and I felt that she was a bad influence. So yes, I hated Genesis.
Ms. Martini, she was planning to marry your daughter. How were you handling that?
Well, I wasn't happy about it, Miss Branham. Between Genesis's attitude and her debt, she wasn't exactly the type of person I had hoped my only daughter would marry.
What do you mean, her debt?
Well, every once in a while, Genesis would ask me or Casey for a few $100s here and there, so I got the impression that she wasn't the best with finances. But it wasn't until wedding prep started that I realized quite how much debt she was in.
Objection to relevance.
Ms. Branham, your response?
Yes, Your Honor. Genesis Petrillo's debt is extremely relevant to this trial today. Not only has the plaintiff made an issue out of Genesis Petrillo's relationship with Ms. Martini, which she's addressing right now, but they've brought into evidence Exhibit 24 prior to this witness's testimony that actually talks about how much money Ms. Petrillo gave Ms. Martini gave Genesis Petrillo. So the debt Genesis Petrillo was in is extremely relevant not only to the relationship between Ms. Martini and Genesis Petrillo, but also to the letter Ms. Martini wrote.
Ms. McCollum, your response?
Yes, Your Honor. They've already established that they didn't have a good relationship. We've already established that Ms. Martini was trying to pay Ms. Petrillo off. The fact that Ms. Petrillo was in debt herself only goes to impugn her character. It has no actual relevant effect on whether or not Harper Martini committed the issue at issue today.
May I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
Yes, please, briefly.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Petrillo's debt is relevant to not only Ms. Martini's relationship with her, but again, to that letter Ms. Martini wrote. It's essential that she have the opportunity to explain her relationship with Ms. Petrillo, as well as the letter she wrote prior to June 7th and what she meant by the statements in it.
I find the evidence to be relevant in that previously the letter was admitted. It contained evidence of an offer of money, and certainly, whether or not Ms. Petrillo was in debt is certainly relevant to whether or not she would accept that offer. So I'll allow inquiry into the topic. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Martini, how did you find out about Ms. Petrillo's debt?
Well, we were meeting with our wedding planner and discussing how much the wedding was going to cost. So of course the question comes up, how are we going to pay for this? That's when Genesis decided to mention that she wouldn't be paying for any of the wedding. When I pressed her for the details, I found out that she had $300,000 of student loans.
So Ms. Martini, who ultimately paid for that wedding?
Me. I paid for and had to plan everything. I mean, at that point, it was clear that those kids were in way over their heads. I had to hire and work with a wedding planner. I took care of the food catering service, and I hosted all of it at Peony Estates.
Ms. Martini, in those months you spent planning your daughter's wedding, were you also managing your business?
Look, Casey deserved the perfect wedding. And if that meant I needed to be 120% devoted to planning it, so be it. So in those months, I'll admit I was a little more hands-off than usual. I just handled the finances of Peony Estates, and I delegated everything else to my head winemaker.
So Ms. Martini, in those months leading up to your daughter's wedding, can you tell us anything about what was going on at your business during that time?
Honestly, not from an operations standpoint, no. I did have to pull some of my employees to help with the wedding during those months, so I know that the 2019 wine production team was short-staffed, but that's about all I can tell you.
So Ms. Martini, you've talked about how you were involved in wedding prep as a sole financer, but how were you involved as a mother?
With all the planning I had to do, I sort of had to take on a boss role during that whole process. It wasn't until the day before the wedding rehearsal when Casey and I were finally able to sit down and have a heart-to-heart about my concerns with Genesis.
And how did that conversation go?
It was eye-opening. It wasn't until that conversation that I realized how much of a toll my arguments with Genesis were taking on my daughter. I mean, to me, all that back and forth with Genesis, it was just petty. It didn't keep me up at night. But Casey's a lot more sensitive than I am. I knew I needed to make it up to her.
How did you try to make it up to your daughter?
Well, at her rehearsal dinner the next day, I gave Genesis a bottle of one of our newest wines, Cara. I figured it wouldn't mean much to Genesis because she'd said plenty of times how much she hated my wine, but I thought it would mean a lot to Casey. When I gave my toast that night, I handed Genesis the bottle, but I was looking at Casey the whole time.
At this time, Your Honor, we are displaying Exhibits 2A and 2B. Pursuant to Stipulation 3, they have been entered into evidence prior to trial.
Thank you, counsel.
Ms. Martini, is this on the left here, that bottle of wine that you gave Ms. Petrillo?
Yes, ma'am, that's the bottle of 2019 Cara wine. Because Peony Estates is a family business, I thought this would be a good gift to symbolize me welcoming Genesis into our family.
Ms. Martini, I just want to be clear. Did you give Ms. Petrillo this bottle of wine in secret?
No, like I said, I gave it to her at the rehearsal dinner in front of all of our guests. There was no reason to make it a secret.
Ms. Martini, when you gave this bottle of Cara wine to Genesis Petrillo, did you know that it had your winery's pesticides in it?
Absolutely not. I still have no idea how that happened. Like I was saying before, I was totally hands-off in our wine production those months leading up to the wedding. You'd have to ask my head winemaker, Austin Lewis, about how that happened.
So to be very clear, did you ever put pesticides into your winery's own wine?
No, I would never do something like that. I mean, I didn't like Genesis, but that bottle was meant to be a gift, not a murder weapon.
Ms. Martini, there's one last thing that we've got to talk about. Do you remember writing a letter to Genesis Petrillo before your daughter's wedding rehearsal dinner?
I do.
Would you recognize that letter in court today?
I would.
At this time, Your Honor, we are displaying Exhibit 24, which has been previously entered into evidence.
Thank you.
Ms. Martini, why did you write this letter?
I was worried about the $300,000 of debt that Genesis was in. Casey's been hurt before by people just being after her for her money, so Genesis's debt made me suspicious. I knew that the moment she walked down that aisle and married my daughter, Casey would take on all of that debt too. So in my blunt manner, I asked Genesis to walk away with this letter. I didn't want my daughter to lose her family heirlooms, her home, her assets, and then be heartbroken once Genesis got what she needed and left.
What were you going to do if Miss Petrillo chose not to walk away?
Well, honestly, nothing. This was a test. In the letter, I threatened to take her out of the picture the hard way by telling Casey about all of the debt that she was in. But I really just wanted to see where her priorities were. If Genesis left with the money, she would know she was just marrying my daughter to pay off her debts. But if she stayed, then I would know that she was marrying my daughter because she loved her.
Thank you, Ms. Martini. I have nothing further at this time.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, thank you, Ms. McCarthy.
Ms. Martini, you got a call at around 2:30 a.m. on June 8th, 2019. Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
It was a call from one of your employees, wasn't it?
Yes, I'm pretty sure it was Austin Lewis. Sounded like her, but I couldn't really tell. She didn't say what her name was. I assumed it was Austin, though.
You were told, Ms. Martini, that someone had been taken from your winery to the Midlands Hospital. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I assumed it was Genesis, seeing as she'd gotten alcohol poisoning several times before.
Well, let's be clear about something, Ms. Martini. They didn't know why this person was taken, did they?
I don't know if the person who called me knew or not. They didn't mention in the call, though.
They didn't say who it was either, did they?
No, it was a brief, rushed phone call. It was actually pretty strange.
So surely, Ms. Martini, after you got that phone call, the first thing you did was go check in on Casey, right?
No, ma'am, like I said, I assumed that it was probably Genesis. I mean, that would be my first guess. Genesis was always drinking heavily at these events. I assumed she'd gotten alcohol poisoning again, so I checked her room first.
Well, let's be clear. When you saw that Genesis Petrillo wasn't in her bedroom, you didn't then go to the hospital to make sure she was okay, did you?
No, I wouldn't be able to. I'm not Genesis's next of kin or anything. I figured she'd be back soon. This sort of thing had happened all the time in the past.
Well, I want to talk about exactly what you did inside of Genesis Petrillo's bedroom. You found that bottle of Cara wine that you'd given her earlier, didn't you?
Ma'am, I didn't just find it. I tripped over it. It was lying in the middle of the floor.
And on that bottle of wine was a label that identified that bottle as coming from your winery, right?
Right, all of our wines have labels on them.
But you'd agree with me, you didn't want that bottle to have a label, did you?
Ma'am, I was the one who put the label on the bottle in the first place. It was from my winery.
When you found that bottle in Miss Petrillo's bedroom that night, you decided to rip off the label, is that correct?
Right, I went to throw the bottle away. In case Genesis was coming back, I didn't want her to trip over it like I had and be sent back to the hospital. So I tossed the bottle in the wastebasket in the room.
But let's be clear, before you got rid of that bottle, you made sure to remove its label first. Is that correct?
Of course. Our wine bottles are recyclable, our labels aren't. Whenever we go to toss it into the wastebasket, we always take our labels off.
Miss Martini, needless to say that wedding that was scheduled for the next morning, it didn't happen, did it?
Obviously not, ma'am. I mean, we're here today. We know that Genesis died.
And really, Miss Martini, that was what you had always wanted, wasn't it?
Ma'am, I hadn't always wanted for Genesis Petrillo to die at my winery. This has been a PR nightmare for my company.
Miss Martini, your daughter and your business are two very important things to you, aren't they?
Absolutely. And both have suffered from this, ma'am.
Well, you'd agree with me that you actually saw Miss Petrillo as a threat to your business, not only your daughter, didn't you?
Well, sure. The handful of times she'd stopped by the winery, she would complain about it in front of guests.
So I want to talk about a letter that you wrote to Miss Petrillo. Could we get that up on the screen, please? You offered Miss Petrillo $300,000 if she would pack up and leave before that wedding, didn't you?
Right, I already talked about that. I can explain it again, though, if you want. This was a test to see if Genesis was really after Casey for the right reasons.
Miss Martini, this wasn't just a test, was it?
Yes, it was.
Miss Martini, you saw this as the best way to get Genesis out of your and your daughter's lives, didn't you?
Sure, if she was marrying Casey for the wrong reasons just for her money, I figured this would be the only way to find out. Luckily, she stayed and I let her keep the money. She was clearly there for Casey because she loved her.
In this note, you made it clear what would happen to Miss Petrillo if she turned down your offer, didn't you?
Right, like I said, it was a test. I didn't actually follow through with it, but I said that I would tell Casey all about Genesis's death that she was hiding.
Miss Martini, that isn't what you said in this letter, is it? You said, otherwise, I will take you out of the picture the hard way. Those were your words, weren't they?
Yes, ma'am. Like I said, this is just a test, but that's what I said that I would do. I would tell Casey about the debt.
To be clear, the only words, the only threat you made in this letter is I will take you out of the picture the hard way. Those were your words, yes or no?
Sure, that's what I wrote, but I also had a conversation with Genesis about it.
When Genesis turned down this offer, you know you had to figure out a different way to stop that wedding, didn't you?
No, ma'am. Like I said, when Genesis stayed through the 7th, I realized that she was actually marrying Casey because she loved her, not just because she loved her trust fund. That's why I let her keep that money. I realized if they were going to get married, they should start their married life debt-free. I let her keep those $300,000 to marry my daughter.
Miss Martini, you prepared a special bottle of wine to give Miss Petrillo, did you not?
Right, I prepared wine for all of the people in the wedding party. Kara was for Genesis. It was a way to welcome her into our family.
You'd agree with me, Miss Martini, that the wine you produce at your winery is normally safe to drink, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am. If I thought it wasn't, I wouldn't have given it to anyone.
That's right. You even sampled this wine before you gave it to Miss Petrillo, didn't you?
That's right. I sample all of our wines. I luckily didn't ingest any of it. I just swirled it around in my mouth for a moment and then rinsed. I'd hate to think what would have happened had I not.
I want to talk about an experience you had a couple years ago. You saw an employee at your winery drink wine that had been accidentally contaminated with pesticides, didn't you?
I did. It was horrific.
And that experience, it taught you some things about pesticides, didn't it?
Right. It showed that we need to be careful. You can't smell or taste them. You have to be extremely careful when you're spraying. That's why I told Austin Lewis and all of my employees to be careful with it.
Ms. Martini, you understood on June 7th, 2019 that those pesticides were odorless, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
You understood that they were colorless?
Yes.
You understood that if mixed into wine, they could be deadly, right?
Exactly. That's why I told my employees to make sure they had safety standards in place.
Ms. Martini, to be clear, on June 7th, you had access to those pesticides, didn't you?
Sure, but I hadn't been on the winery side of the property in months. I knew where they were, though.
Your Honor, nothing further.
Thank you. Any redirect examination?
Briefly, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Martini, I want to talk about something Ms. McCollum just asked you about. Had your winery ever had pesticides end up in its wine before this?
Well, yes. When that employee drank it, he almost died. I told my employees to be more careful after that.
So this has happened before June 7th of 2019 then?
Yes, ma'am. I told all of them to change the safety standards. I told Austin Lewis that she needed to make sure everyone was being more careful.
Do you know if she ever did that?
I certainly hope she did, but I can't say for certain.
Thank you, Ms. Martini. At this point, I have nothing further.
Okay, any recross based on those limited questions?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, Miss Martini, that person at your winery, they sprayed their own wine glass with pesticides, didn't they?
I hope not intentionally, but the wine glass that they had in the room while they were spraying pesticides.
That's right. So they weren't drinking out of a bottle of wine that had already been produced, were they?
No, the wine had been produced, yes. They weren't
Let's
drinking.
be clear, no bottle of wine that you have ever sold to a consumer, has contained pesticides, right?
I would hope not, but ma'am, I have no way of knowing that.
Nothing further.
All right, thank you. Any requests regarding this witness?
Just that she can step down, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Martini, you can step down and be excused. Defense, do you have any further presentation at this point in time?
You can give us just a moment, Your Honor. We're resolving some technical difficulties.
Okay. Do you need to take a few minute break, or are they going to be resolved expeditiously?
They've already been resolved, Your Honor. And at this time, we call Blair Osborne to the stand.
Okay. Ms. Osborne, you've been sworn. Do you want to proceed with your examination, counsel?
May I, Your Honor?
Yes, thank you.
Now, before I begin, Ms. Osborne, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can, sir.
Okay, and can you introduce yourself to us?
Sure. Hello, my name is Blair Osborne.
Well, where are you from, Miss Osborne?
Well, I'm from Brooklyn. If you've ever been there, I'm sorry. If you ever want to go there, I'm also sorry.
What do you do for a living, ma'am?
Well, I own an event planning business called Bliss by Blair Events. Over the past 10 years, I've made my clients happier than a college student getting their stimulus check.
So how are you involved in today's case?
Well, a longtime client of mine, Harper Martini, she contacted me to plan a wedding for her daughter, Casey Soto, and her fiance, Genesis Petrina. We decided to plan the wedding at Harper's business, Peony Estates.
So Miss Soto and Miss Petrillo, were they involved in the planning of that wedding?
Yeah, God bless them. Once Genesis and Casey got involved, it was nothing but arguing between the bride and Harper. Look, I don't know if this comes as a surprise to anybody, but Harper and Genesis did not get along. You know what they say about strong personalities butting heads with each other.
Ma'am, what did they say?
I don't know. I figured you knew.
Okay, Miss Osborne, what would they argue about?
Oh, well, they argued about anything. I mean, flower arrangements, tablecloths, the flavor of the cake. One time, I had Genesis say that Harper gets his shoes from Payless.
And these arguments, do they sound intense to you?
Oh, God, no. I mean, I've heard far worse. Listen, I was the one that planned Carol Baskin's first wedding. That whole situation made the beef between Harper and Genesis look like a kindergarten slapping contest.
Objection, Your Honor, to this witness's characterization of that relationship.
Okay, Mr. Prada, your response?
Your Honor, I don't think that the characterization of a relationship is a recognized objection under the Midlands Rules of Evidence. If opposing counsel would like to clarify, I'd be more than happy to respond to their objection.
Misleading the jury under Rule 403, Your Honor.
Oh, sorry. I'll allow the inquiry. Please continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Osborne, were you paid by Harper Martini for your planning of the wedding?
Absolutely. By the end of the wedding, Harper dished out over $22,000. I mean, there were times that I would think, maybe Harper should go with the more affordable option here. But Harper, she wasn't taking this one lightly. She insisted on the most expensive option for her daughter.
Well, I want to move on to the week of the wedding, okay? Were you at the rehearsal dinner?
Of course I was.
And did you see anything important there?
Well, when my assistant Tamara broke the heel of her stilettos and left the wedding venue weeping, the priest fell asleep right in front of the altar. May he rest peacefully. But the real highlight of the evening was definitely the toast that Harper gave to Genesis.
Why do you say that toast was a highlight?
Harper gave Genesis this beautiful bottle of Peony Estates wine. And She gave this whole speech too. She got up in front of everyone, gave Genesis the wedding gift, and well, I watched her pour a glass for Genesis in front of everybody.
And that toast she gave, when she gave it, did it sound genuine to you?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Response, Your Honor?
Yeah, please.
I'm not asking if the toast was genuine. I'm asking if it sounded genuine to the witness. This would be based on observations that they made and things that they heard. It's their rationally based perception pursuant to Rule 701.
Mr. Jones, any response?
Yes, Your Honor, this opinion would be speculative about how genuine Harper Martini was being when she gave that toast.
I'll sustain the objection. Please move on, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. I'll rephrase. Did Harper Martini's speech affect you?
Oh my goodness, yes. I started crying. It was so beautiful. I mean, everyone in the audience was shedding tears. I hadn't cried that much since, since I caught my husband cheating on me with my assistant, Tamara.
Moving along, ma'am. Did the rehearsal dinner end after those toasts?
The divorce is going great. Thank you for asking. But to answer your question, yes. At around midnight, everyone seemed to be heading off to bed. I decided I'd get some beauty sleep for the wedding the next morning.
Were you at Peony Estates the next morning?
I was. At around 8 o'clock, I was helping Harper set up when Angel Rodriguez pulled up looking messier than I was when I walked in on my husband and Tamara. She told me that Genesis was in the hospital, and we found out later that Genesis had passed away.
Miss Osborne, I want to be clear for the members of this jury. Did you ever see Miss Martini put any pesticides in the wine she gave to Miss Petrina?
No, I never saw anything like that.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Mr. Jones, cross-examination?
Certainly, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, please.
Miss Osborne, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Now, you were the wedding planner for the wedding between Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soda, correct?
Yes, sir, I was.
And Miss Osborne, you'd agree with me that planning that wedding was the worst professional experience of your life, wouldn't you?
Oh, certainly. I mean, besides the one funeral wake that I planned, I've never had to deal with death in one of my events.
Well, you also had to deal with all the fighting between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo, didn't you?
Yes, there was certainly fighting, but again, that's nothing out of the ordinary for a wedding planner to experience.
Well, you'd say they were fighting constantly when you were with them, right, Miss Osborne?
Yes, that's true. They definitely were not friends.
There's a specific fight I'd like to talk about in May of 2019. Now, on May 11th of 2019, Harper Martini played you a voicemail out loud that Genesis Petrillo had left her, correct?
Yes, she did.
In that voicemail, Genesis Petrillo said that her and Casey were going to Paris after the wedding.
Objection, Your Honor, to cumulative. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, the evidence has already been admitted onto the record pursuant to stipulation 3, and opposing counsel has already delved into its contents on a prior witness. Therefore, this is cumulative. This evidence has already been read onto the record by said witness, and it's wasting the time of the jury, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Jones, your response.
Yes, Your Honor, this is not a needless presentation of cumulative evidence. Miss Osborne was there when Harper Martini played this voicemail out loud. And if I may make an offer of proof?
Yes, please.
After playing that voicemail out loud, Harper Martini gave several statements about how she felt about Genesis Petrillo, and those statements have immense probative value. So what we're doing here is putting those statements in the context of the voicemail Harper Martini played out loud.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes, your response, please.
If their intent is to offer those statements, Your Honor, we don't have any objection to those statements because they're statements of their party opponent. But Your Honor, for them to again read onto the record and a part of an exhibit which has already been admitted and a part which we already allowed them to read in the past is cumulative. It's wasting the jury's time, and it's inadmissible pursuant to Rule 403.
A final response, Your Honor.
Yes, briefly.
We're not reading these statements for their own sake. We're reading these statements to place the reaction of Harper Martini within the proper context. And that has immense probative value.
Certainly the objection has some merit, but I will allow the reading of the transcript into the record so that it can orient the jury to the following testimony from the witness. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Osborne, in that voicemail that Harper Martini played for you, Genesis Petrillo said that her and Casey were going to Paris after the wedding, right?
Oh, yes, that's true.
And then Genesis Petrillo said that Harper Martini would die alone at that sad little place and no one would care, right?
Yes, she did say all those things.
This was less than a month before the wedding, right, Miss Osborne?
Yes, if I remember correctly, it was.
And after playing that voicemail, the defendant said one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill her. Weren't those the defendant's words?
Yes, they were. Genesis certainly was not the most sober sending that voicemail. That certainly was clear.
Well, Ms. Osborne, I'm not asking you to guess about whether or not Ms. Petrillo was sober. I'm asking you about the defendant's words. And what the defendant said was one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill her, right?
Yes, that's what she said.
And later on in that same meeting, the defendant answered a phone call in front of you, right?
Yes, that's true.
And during that phone call, the defendant said, no, keep the Cara where it is. No, don't have them move those pesticides, right?
Yes, that was said. I don't know exactly what Cara is, but yes, that's what she said.
Now, you were at the wedding rehearsal on June 7th, weren't you, Miss Osborne?
Yes, I was.
And by that time, by June 7th, you thought that the relationship between the defendant and Genesis Petrillo had reached a boiling point, right?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Okay, your response, Mr. Jones?
Yes, Your Honor, this witness has already testified that she witnessed countless fights over the course of this wedding planning process. So it's within her rationally based perception to say that those fights had reached a boiling point by June 7th. She's comparing them to the other fights that she had seen.
Okay, your response, Mr. Parada?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is trying to elicit testimony which is inadmissible pursuant to Rule 602, precisely because it's speculating into the inner workings of the minds of both Miss Petrillo, as well as Miss Martini. Because delving into whether or not it was a boiling point is something that only they would know. She would not be able to testify about whether or not they were reaching a climax in the relationship that would lead to some sort of a fall later.
Response?
I'll sustain the objection and some of the testimony of the rationally based perceptions of the witness. Thank you.
And move to strike that question, Your Honor?
Yes, question struck.
Ms. Osborne, you noticed the defendant and Genesis Petrillo arguing quite a bit on June 7th, didn't you?
I did, which is why I thought it was so beautiful that they made amends over that speech.
Well, their arguing got so bad, Ms. Osborne, that Casey Soto pulled you aside and asked you to keep the defendant away from Genesis Petrillo, right?
She did ask me to help her separate the two. It wasn't difficult considering they kind of avoided each other already.
But that's what Casey Soto asked, that you keep the defendant away from Genesis Petrillo, right?
She did. I could tell that she seemed a bit nervous about the day, and I'm sure that's something that she didn't need in her life at that moment.
Then, as you told us, you saw the toasts between Genesis Petrillo and Harper Martini later that night, correct?
I did. It was very beautiful.
You said it was beautiful, Miss Osborne, but you also heard them insulting each other during those toasts, didn't you?
Well, those were that was prior to the one that Miss Martini gave to Genesis when she gave her that bottle of wine.
You heard them insult each other during the rehearsal dinner, correct?
During the rehearsal dinner, yes. Again, that wasn't at that point that I was discussing.
And then after that, you saw Harper Martini walk over and pour Genesis Petrillo a glass of wine, right?
Yes, she poured that glass in front of the entire wedding party right after she gave her the bottle.
You didn't see anyone other than Genesis Petrillo drink that wine, did you?
I didn't see anybody else consume it, but I did see multiple glasses of it poured and sitting out on the table.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Osborne. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any redirect examination?
No redirect, Your Honor. We simply ask that Ms. Osborne be allowed to step down.
Okay, Ms. Osborne, you're excused as a witness. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if we could turn to the defense, any further witnesses at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. At this point in time, the defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand.
Okay, Austin Lewis, you're sworn.
And Your Honor, one moment for us to get set up over here.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Judge Gayswood, I apologize for that. May I proceed?
Yes, please, thank you.
Before I begin, Ms. Lewis, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, sir. Can you guys see and hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Austin Lewis.
Ms. Lewis, what do you do for a living?
Well, right now I'm the head winemaker at a winery business called Peony Estates.
And how are you involved in today's case?
I'm aware that Miss Genesis Petrina's family is claiming that Harper Martini poisoned my company's wine. I'm just here to make sure that Peony Estates is not caught up in these allegations.
Ms. Lewis, you just said your company. Do you own Peony Estates?
Well, no, sir. I only own about a 10% stock, but I've been with Peony Estates since 2015 when the doors opened. Harper Martini, who is my boss, is the owner and proprietor of the company. And she's still in the Zoom call, right? She's watching, she's listening and everything.
Yes, Ms. Lewis. Is that going to be an issue for you?
No, sir, not at all. Regardless, I'm positive that nobody will be able to tie my company's wine back to what sadly happened to Miss Petrina.
All right, Ms. Lewis. So I want to talk to you about the production of that 2019 car wine you just mentioned. Can you walk us through the production of that wine?
Sure. So we planted the seeds for the car wine in 2017 and harvested them in August of 2018. After that, we left those grapes to ferment in our wine cellar for just a couple of months to taste before we started the bottling process.
Your Honor, I'm sharing my screen of Exhibit 4. It's been pre-admitted pursuant to Stipulation 3.
Thank you.
Ms. Lewis, do you recognize what I'm showing you?
Yes, sir. This is a map of Peony Estates.
So how exactly does Peony Estates harvest its grapes?
So our winery is right next to a swamp, and because we've dealt with pest infestations in our grapes, we use chemical pesticides to treat that. And Peony Estates is also on a wide slope, so when we spray those pesticides, the pesticides that are left over dribble down the slope and accumulate more so in the bottom ditch of the vineyard in those grapes there. It's because of this process that every year we throw away these contaminated grapes.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation under 701. May I explain?
Yes, please.
Specifically to the last portion of the witness's answer that those grapes were contaminated. Now, she's testified that she actually sprays all of the grapes with pesticides and that those grapes are used. So for her to say that these grapes at the bottom, just because they receive a little more exposure, are contaminated would be speculative. We haven't heard any foundation on the record that would give her the ability to make that assessment.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
The witness actually just laid that foundation. She explained that when they spray the grapes, the pesticides dribble down that slope that she was just talking about and accumulate in sort of a puddle where those bottom vineyard grapes are sitting in those pesticides and absorbing those pesticides into the grapes. So that's the foundation that she's laid, saying that they are contaminated.
Response?
Yes, please.
We actually haven't heard that those roots absorb those pesticides. That's something that counsel just told us, but that's not what the testimony reflects. The fact that there are pesticides at the bottom is not enough foundation for this witness to establish that those grapes were contaminated and thus dangerous to use to produce wine. We need to hear about some scientific tests or other evidence in order to reach that kind of assessment.
Okay, I'll allow the testimony. It's based on the rational and reasonable perceptions of the witness. I believe that a proper foundation has been laid. I appreciate the objection, but it's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Lewis, you told us that you would throw away those bottom vineyard grapes. How, if at all, would that affect Peony Estates' profits?
So unfortunately, every year we sacrifice a fifth of our profits, that's 20%, by disposing of the grapes at the bottom of the vineyard. And we do this just to ensure the safety of our customers.
Can you tell us if you know if any of your employees had any issues throwing away so many profits?
Why do you ask?
Let me rephrase, Ms. Lewis. Do you remember sending out a company memo around the time those grapes were harvested?
Yes, sir, I do.
Your Honor, I'm sharing my screen of what hasn't been entered into evidence as Exhibit 12.
Okay, let's see Exhibit 12.
Ms. Lewis, can you identify what I'm showing you right now?
Yes, sir. This is that memo you just asked me about. I wrote this the same day I sent it out to all of our employees on the email chain.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of that email?
Yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, sir.
And was this document kept in the regular course of Peony Estates' business activity?
It was. We send out these types of memos on the very first of every month.
Do you, as the head winemaker and the author of this memo, keep memos like this on record after you send them out?
Yes, sir. The DHES by law requires us to do so, so I keep them all in my office.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 12 into evidence, excuse me.
Okay, Mr. Mulligan, any objection to Exhibit 12?
Yes, Your Honor, objection to hearsay.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
We've laid the foundation for 8036, an exception to the hearsay rule.
Response?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I look at 8036, there are actually a number of prongs that need to be met. Firstly, under A, the record was made at or near the time that the memo was transmitted. They haven't established that it was made and recorded. Secondly, under Rule C, under 6C, they have to establish that making the record was a regular practice of the business. They haven't established that. They just established that Ms. Lewis had made this memo and then transmitted it to other people and kept a record. They haven't established that it's a regularly conducted activity. So under A and C, they haven't met the requirements for this particular exception.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Discussing those one at a time, we actually laid the foundation that this witness made the memo and wrote the memo as the author shortly before sending it out. And she also laid the foundation that this is a regular business practice, that at the first of every month, they send out memos just like this one to their employees. So we've met both of those prongs, A and C. And furthermore, she's the custodian as the author and the record keeper of Peony Estates. So we've laid all the prongs of 8036, a record of regularly conducted business activity.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree that the foundational requirements have been met, and I recall the testimony as to both. So let's continue with the testimony. The objections overruled.
So just to be clear, Your Honor, before we continue, is the document in evidence?
Are you moving to admit it in the? Yes, the
Yes,
document is admitted in evidence. Thank you.
So, Ms. Lewis, can you go ahead and tell us? Excuse me, Ms. Lewis, can you go ahead and tell us why you wrote this memo?
I mean, we were having a pretty rough year financially. We were having to throw away cask after cask of wine, and that means throwing away the business's money. And the less money we have, the more layoffs we'll need. So in this memo, I wrote it with the purpose of telling my employees that we needed to step up our pesticide spraying, or they would be fired.
Do you know how your employees reacted to the possibility of layoffs?
Mr. Izquierdo, Peony Estates employees complied with all health and safety protocols for pesticide spraying.
I'll rephrase, Ms. Lewis. Do you know how your employees reacted to throwing out those grapes at the bottom of the vineyard?
They didn't sound too happy. All right, is that what you want me to say? Here I am telling them that we literally cannot afford to employ them all, and then in the same sentence, I'm telling them that we have.
Your Honor, to narrative. The question as posed was how the employees reacted. Ms. Lewis is now going on a tirade about her feelings about the employees' reactions and the circumstances of it.
Response, Your Honor? I think she was just on her second sentence of the answer. It certainly wasn't narrative.
Your Honor, I believe you're muted right now.
Oh, sorry. Any further response, Mr. Mulligan?
Yes, Your Honor. The question as posed was how the employees responded to throwing away the grapes. And the witness's answer was actually delving into more than that. It was delving into her own feelings, into the profit margins of the company as a whole. That wasn't responsive to the question.
Okay, I tend to agree with Mr. Mulligan. We'll strike that portion of the response that was not directly responsive to the question. You can rephrase and ask further questions on the topic, Mr. Izquierdo.
Yes, Ms. Lewis. Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Lewis, you just told us that your company employees weren't too happy about that memo. Do you know why?
I mean, of course, some of them came into my office after I sent it and, spoke with me. And I mean, here I am telling them that we literally cannot afford to employ all of the employees. And in the same sentence, I'm telling them that we have to keep throwing away a fifth of the money we could use to feed their families, Mr. Izquierdo. Of course, it's reasonable that they would not be happy about this.
Did you oversee the grape harvest in 2018?
Well, no, I had a family emergency and I had to leave town.
Since you weren't at Peony Estates during that harvest, can you tell us if your employees followed your instructions and threw out those grapes?
I trusted them to do what I asked, of course. I mean, if I didn't have eyes on them all the time, I wasn't personally there, so I was supposed to answer your question, no, but I believed in them.
Well, let's move on to where that wine was kept and bottled. Did Peony Estates ever spray pesticides in the bottling area?
Sir, of course we did. There were pests. That's what we needed to do by law, obviously.
Did you ever spray pesticides in the same room as the 2019 Carl wine?
Sir, if this is about the FDA citation, we were caught at a bad time.
Your Honor, to non-responsive.
I agree, Your Honor. I'll re-ask my question.
Okay.
In that case, I would ask that the portion of the witness testimony about FDA citations be stricken.
Yes, we'll strike that portion from the record. Please continue, counsel.
Ms. Lewis, you mentioned that you were spraying pesticides in the bottling area. Did this affect the 2019 Carl wine?
Well, yes. When we were spraying the bottling area, and during that time we, were approached by an FDA inspector, and we received a citation due to our handling and storage practices of pesticide. This was all the same time that we were bottling that 2019 Carl wine.
What was Peony Estates doing during the time of this inspection?
Well, I mean, we were in the process of bottling the 2019 car, but at the same time we were dealing with a bug infestation in that same bottling room. So we moved the pesticides into the bottling area, but that's it. That's all that happened.
Ms. Lewis, are you familiar with FDA guidelines?
I mean, of course I am. I had to go through their training to get my license to distribute alcohol.
Was the wine still in the room when you brought those pesticides in?
Well, yes, it was.
Did you plastic wrap any of the equipment or the wine casks when you brought those pesticides in?
Not when we brought the pesticides in, but we knew to plastic wrap everything, and we were getting ready to, sure.
Did you spray pesticides on Peony Estates premises in anticipation for that wedding rehearsal on June 7th?
Well, I mean, yes, sir. It's May of 2019. It's humid. There are pests. We took every precaution, so we sprayed every inch that we could.
Ms. Lewis, is it a health code violation to have pesticides in the same room as the wine you're producing?
Objection, Your Honor, to Rule 602, lack of personal knowledge. As to whether this witness would know it's a health code violation, they haven't laid that foundation.
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
I just asked her if she's familiar with FDA guidelines, and she said she was. She can testify of whether or not it was a health code violation.
Mr. Mulligan, any response?
Your Honor, this witness is not a health inspector. Just the fact that she's been trained on practices that they need to employ to keep safety doesn't mean she knows what the regulations are and whether or not they've broken them based on the actions that they've taken. So they need to hear more foundation that she's been familiar with these particular regulations.
I believe she's testified that she's familiar with the regulations. She wouldn't be treated as an expert witness, but certainly she has more knowledge of the topic than than someone unfamiliar with it. So I'll allow the testimony. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Lewis, I'll ask you again, is it a health code violation under those FDA guidelines to have pesticides in the same room as your wine?
I would like to express that this instance does not reflect our standard business practices at Peony.
Your Honor, to non-responsive.
I agree, Your Honor. I'll ask again.
Yes, please.
Ms. Lewis, did Peony Estates violate FDA health codes when producing the wine Genesis drank?
Mr. Izquierdo, would you like for me to throw my company under the bus?
Ms. Lewis.
Once again, non-responsive.
I'll ask again, Your Honor.
Okay.
Ms. Lewis, I'm going to need a yes or a no. Did Peony Estates violate FDA guidelines when producing the wine Genesis Petrina drank?
Yes. Fine. Yes, Peony Estates violated FDA guidelines when producing the wine that Genesis Petrina drank.
I got nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Lewis, I want to start by talking about those grapes you mentioned earlier.
Might as well do it.
You said you had concerns about the grapes at the bottom of the hill, right?
Absolutely. Yes, I did.
You approached the defendant, Harper Martini, about those concerns in 2018, right?
Yes, sir. She was, in retrospect, probably the wrong person to approach because she seemed to care little or none whatsoever about the practices.
I'm not asking you to tell us whether you think she cared or not. I'm asking what you did. You approached her about your concerns, yes or no?
Yes.
You told her to throw away those grapes for you, yes or no?
Yes, but I've never seen her out in our vineyard even once.
Miss Lewis, Miss Martini told you she would throw away those grapes, didn't she?
Yes, sir, but this is the same woman who told me that a little bit of pesticide isn't a big deal. I've never even seen her sitting in.
My question is different. I'm not asking what Miss Martini told you about pesticides. I'm asking what she said she'd do. She told you she would throw them away, yes or no?
Yes, and at the time I trusted her to do so. Absolutely, I did.
Miss Martini never told you she used those grapes to produce wine, did she?
No, sir.
Ma'am, you oversee every spraying of pesticides at Peony Estates, yes?
Yes, sir, I have to be the one to do it because Miss Martini is not involved in the practices or harvesting whatsoever.
Before every spraying, you tell your employees to approach you if they see any mistakes, right?
I do. They're not the brightest of the bunch, but they're hardworking and they try. So yes, I trusted them to do so.
Miss Martini, you train them annually, don't you?
Mr. Mulligan, I'm not Miss Martini. I'm Miss Lewis.
Excuse me, Miss Lewis, my apologies. You train your employees annually to spray pesticides safely, don't you?
Yes, sir. Every year I send them the link to the FDA Introduction to Pesticide Training video.
Miss Lewis, when those pesticides were brought into that room, they were not sprayed, were they?
No, sir, we were planning on it. I tried to make sure that all of the precautions in that room were safe, but still the FDA gave us a citation for what we were doing.
Exactly, Miss Lewis. You took every step to ensure that it was safe, didn't you?
Personally, yes, sir. I tried. I really did. I couldn't be in the room the full time, but I tried to make sure.
You didn't see those pesticides get sprayed onto the car of wine, did you?
No, sir, the car wine wasn't sitting out in a puddle.
You actually moved the car wine before you proceeded with the spraying, didn't you?
We tried to move everything out with two hands that we could, but there are some things that we can't move.
Miss Lewis, my question was different. You moved the car of wine before you conducted the spraying, yes or no?
I personally did not move anything. I instructed my staff to do so. I'm a bit small, Mr. Mulligan. I have my bigger men do that stuff for me.
You did not see the car of wine in the room when you conducted the spraying, Miss Lewis, yes or no?
I can't recall. I might have missed it, but I don't believe I remember it being in there.
So that's a yes.
I'm not sure. I believe it wasn't, but I can't be sure.
Miss Lewis, let's talk about some things the defendant told you in the months leading up to the wedding, okay?
Sure.
She told you she hated Genesis, right?
Yes, sir. Harper is a lot of things. A comedian is not one of them.
Miss Lewis, she told you she thought Genesis was a bad influence on her daughter, Casey, right?
Yes, sir. She says the same thing about our plumber when he takes a smoke break.
That wasn't my question, Miss Lewis. She said Genesis was a bad influence on Casey, right?
And I said yes.
Miss Lewis, she said if she could make Genesis disappear, she would do so. Yes or no?
Yes, sir. She's also wasted the same line countless times on our plumber. She has the same 3 jokes.
I'm not asking about what she says about your plumber, ma'am. What she told you was if she could make Genesis disappear, she would do so. Yes or no?
Sir, I've already said yes to your question.
Your Honor, no further questions.
Mr. Mulligan, are you asking for a direct answer to the question?
I would like a direct answer, Your Honor, to that particular question.
Okay, if the witness could provide a direct answer to the question.
Sure. Once again, yes. The answer is yes.
And with that, Your Honor, no further questions from the plaintiff.
Okay. Any redirect examination, Mr. Izquierdo?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. Ms.
Okay.
Lewis, Harper Martini's involvement with Peony Estates was brought up on your cross-examination. I want to go over that. What's Miss Martini's position in Peony Estates?
She's the owner. She crunches numbers. I think I saw her maybe in our bottling room for a spraying one single time. Other than that, she's completely hands-off.
So is Ms. Martini involved in the production of the 2019 Carl wine?
No, sir.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Counsel, based on those limited questions, any recross examination?
No recross, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. I suppose do you want to excuse the witness, Ms. Lewis?
Yes, Your Honor. At this point, I would ask the witness step down.
Okay, thank you. That request is granted. Any further witnesses for presentation by the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this point, the defense rests its case in chief. And since all loss is at 2:40, we would just request a 5-minute recess before closing arguments.
So I'm going to assume that there is going to be no presentation of rebuttal evidence by the plaintiff.
No, Your Honor. I'm asking for a limited recess so that the plaintiff does have that opportunity to rebut.
Okay. All right. Any objection to the request for a 5-minute recess?
The plaintiff is amenable to a recess, Your Honor.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute recess. We'll be back on record at 1:20. Let's go off record in this matter at this time.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, you're muted.
I was just talking to myself and going through who's on the, who are the participants. My other judges are here.
Judge Friday is here.
Judge Jalali is here.
All right. At this point in time, the plaintiff or the defense has rested. We don't allow for presentation of rebuttal evidence. So are we prepared to go to closing, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
The defense is ready as well, Your Honor.
So at this point in time, Ms. McCollum, if you want to proceed with your closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. It's 2:30 a.m. on June 8th, 2019, and Harper Martini gets a phone call. It's one of her employees, informing her that someone's been taken from her winery to the Midlands Hospital. She isn't told who, and she isn't told why. After the defendant hangs up the phone, she doesn't do what you'd expect. You see, she doesn't call anyone else to get more information. She doesn't take a trip to the hospital. She doesn't even check in on her own child to make sure that she's okay. Now, something about that phone call makes the defendant walk to Genesis Petrillo's bedroom. Members of the jury, she's looking for something. The now empty bottle of Cara wine she'd given Miss Petrillo just hours earlier. When she finds it, she makes sure to carefully rip off the label, throw it into the trash, and then get rid of that bottle before returning to her own bedroom like nothing happened. Members of the jury, Harper Martini's actions that night are not those of some innocent, oblivious bystander. There is a reason that she knew before anyone else that Miss Petrillo was the one in the hospital that night. It's not a coincidence that the bottle she was so eager to dispose of would later test positive for the pesticides that killed her. No, the events of June 8th, Miss Petrillo's death and its aftermath were all part of the defendant's plan. The plan she'd hatched months before, ever since she learned Miss Petrillo was trying to take her daughter away from her. You see, to keep that from happening, there was no price the defendant wouldn't pay. Now, at the beginning of today's trial, Mr. Mulligan told you we would prove 3 things. First, that the defendant mixed pesticide into wine. Second, that she intended for Miss Petrillo to drink that wine, knowing it was dangerous. Third, that Miss Petrillo died as a result of consuming that poisoned wine. Now, each of these 3 elements, the act, the intent, the harm, had to be proved by a preponderance of the evidence. All that means is more likely than not. 50% and just a feather more. Let's start with the harm because members of the jury, that part should be simple. You see, it was stipulated, mutually agreed upon before trial that the cause of Miss Petrillo's death was pesticide poisoning. And today, Dr. Kwan, chief emergency physician at the Midlands River Valley Hospital, told you that the source of those pesticides was contaminated Cara wine. So we know how Miss Petrillo died. And that means that all that's left is why. Why were there pesticides in that bottle? Now, the defense wants you to think that whatever the reason, well, Harper Martini had nothing to do with it. In fact, I expect that in a couple minutes, Ms. Branham will come before you and tell you how illogical, how unreasonable, how irrational this defendant would have to be to go and put those pesticides into that bottle of wine. But members of the jury, ask yourselves this. Has a single thing about today's trial suggested that Miss Martini acts rationally when it comes to Genesis Petrillo? Just think back to Casey Soto's testimony at the beginning of today's trial. She told you that her mother hated Miss Petrillo, that she routinely threatened her, that she told her that if she made a wrong move, she'd end up 6 feet under. And then Miss Martini testified that she saw Miss Petrillo not only as a threat to her own business, but as a threat to her daughter. She was terrified Miss Petrillo would take her away. And when Miss Petrillo tried to do just that, told the defendant that they were moving to France, that she'd never see her daughter again after the wedding, the defendant knew she had to do everything in her power to make sure that didn't happen. And that's why she wrote this letter. The defendant says, "Leave Casey, and the enclosed $300,000 is yours. Otherwise, I will take you out of the picture the hard way. You have until the 7th. Choose wisely." Members of the jury, it should go without saying that this is not normal. This isn't standard in-law behavior. This isn't some run-of-the-mill family drama. No, we know that Harper Martini was willing to do whatever it took, at whatever the cost, and there was no price the defendant wouldn't pay. And when Genesis Petrillo rejected this offer on June 7th, told the defendant that, like it or not, she was going to wake up the next morning, put on her wedding dress, drive to the church, and marry the love of her life, the defendant made a decision. She just had to make sure that Miss Petrillo never woke up at all. That's why Lonnie Paris watched the defendant immediately following her argument with Miss Petrillo walk into the bottling area. That's why when she left, she was holding a bottle of Cara wine. And that's why left behind her, there was a half-empty canister of the pesticides that killed Miss Petrillo. That's why she gave that bottle to Miss Petrillo that night. It's why Miss Petrillo got sick. It's why Casey Soto had to watch her fiance die, and members of the jury, it's why you are in court here today. All because there was no price this defendant wouldn't pay. Find her liable. Thank you.
Defense closing, Ms. Branham.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. Profits over people. That's why we're here today. We're in this courtroom because a corporation was more focused on their own profits than they were the lives of people. They were focused on all the wrong things. But isn't it so ironic that that's exactly what we've watched the plaintiff do throughout the course of this trial? Because just like Peony Estates, the plaintiff has been focused on all the wrong things. Instead of looking at the story the evidence has been telling here, the plaintiff is so focused on their own version of how they think this happened, on their own story. And that's a problem. Because when the plaintiff came into this courtroom today, and they brought a civil charge of battery against Harper Martini, they brought with them a burden to prove every element of that charge by the greater weight of the evidence. The law is clear. The plaintiff can't just come in here and give you a story. They can't ask you to make leaps in logic when it comes to the elements they had to prove here. They had to prove every element of their charge with evidence. So let's look at those elements right now and see what the evidence has had to say about each of them. Because this case, it really comes down to those top two elements right here. Because members of the jury, we agree with the plaintiff that Genesis Petrillo died because of pesticide-filled wine on June 7th. We just don't agree about how those pesticides got there. So let's start with this first element the plaintiff had to prove, that Harper Martini even had the intent to harm Genesis Petrillo at all. Because the way the plaintiff has been talking here, you'd think they don't have any in-laws themselves. The plaintiff is forgetting that in real life, families fight. In-laws argue. Sometimes they say they hate each other. That doesn't mean they want to harm each other, though. That's a leap in logic the plaintiff is asking you to make, because the only thing the evidence has shown here is the same thing Miss Martini told us herself. She wasn't Genesis Petrillo's biggest fan. She wasn't thrilled that she was going to be marrying her daughter. That didn't mean she wanted to harm her, though. So motive and intent are parts of the plaintiff's charge that come up short when we look at this like a real-life family relationship. That leap in logic, though, it's not the only one the plaintiff has asked you to make throughout the course of today's trial. They've asked you to make quite a lot. Because without those leaps in logic, their story starts to fall apart. I mean, let's look at this letter, for example. The plaintiff wants you to believe that when Miss Martini wrote the words, "I'm going to take you out of the picture the hard way," that she was threatening to harm Genesis Petrillo. But what did she tell us today? She told us that she meant she was going to tell her daughter about all the student debt Miss Petrillo was in. So now the question becomes, how do we know she's telling the truth when she tells us that in court today? Well, we know she is because of one fact the plaintiff isn't even contesting here. Because of something on this letter, that $300,000. You heard that Genesis Petrillo was in $300,000 of student loan debt, so Miss Martini paid off every cent of it. So when we're talking about motive and intent here, Miss Martini had 300,000 reasons to believe that Genesis Petrillo would walk down the aisle on June 8th and marry her daughter the day after she drank that car of wine. She did and paid off all that debt so that her daughter wouldn't go into that debt when she married Genesis Petrillo. So what about the second element the plaintiff had to prove today? That Miss Martini acted based on intent to harm Genesis Petrillo. Well, we know they can't meet that element. Because when we're talking about their burden, that they have to prove that element to the greater weight of the evidence, we know they can't do that because we didn't hear any evidence of it. Think back throughout the course of this trial with every witness that testified today. How many of them told you they saw Miss Martini putting pesticides into her company's own wine? Better yet, how many of them told you that she was even holding a can of pesticides at all? It's the same number of the amount of intent Miss Martini had to harm Genesis Petrillo in the first place. But let's take it a step further. Because the way they're saying Miss Martini would have done this, I mean, Miss McCollum is right. Miss Martini may not have acted rationally when it came to Genesis Petrillo, but she did when it came to her business. So why on earth would she do this with a bottle of her business's wine that was labeled and do it in a room full of hundreds of people that were watching? And better yet, why would she risk her own daughter's life in all this when that bottle of wine went back to the table where her very daughter was sitting? She didn't ask her daughter or tell her daughter not to drink from that bottle because members of the jury, she didn't know it had her company's pesticides in it. So what do we do here? What do we do when the plaintiff's story comes up short? We look at the story the evidence has been telling. Because the evidence told us exactly how pesticides got into the wine Genesis Petrillo drank. You heard that every year Peony Estates harvest their grapes. And every year they have to section off the grapes at the bottom of their slope because they're soaked in pesticides. But today you heard that in 2018, Peony Estates was operating on razor-thin margins. The employees at Peony Estates knew that if they chose to throw away the grapes at the bottom of that slope, they weren't just throwing away their grapes. They were throwing away their paychecks with them. But that grape harvest isn't even the only time Peony Estates cut corners when producing the wine Genesis Petrillo drank, because today you heard about May of 2019. You heard that just a month before Genesis Petrillo was given Cara wine, that Peony Estates was storing pesticides in the same room they were bottling their wine. You heard that from the plaintiff's witness today. You heard that the FDA was invested in how Peony Estates was operating because their employees didn't even know how to handle their pesticides. They were storing open cans of pesticides right next to the bottles of the wine they then served Genesis Petria. And today, Mr. Paris, he told you that Peony Estates failed that health inspection. They weren't allowed to produce wine after that because of how poorly they were handling their wine and their pesticides. This isn't even the first time this has happened. Today, you've heard that Genesis Petrio got sick because of Peony Estates wine. Well, today, you heard that somebody else got sick before too. One of Peony Estates' own employees drank pesticide-filled wine before this even happened in June of 2019 to Miss Petria. And we know why. It's because Peony Estates put profits over people. In the words of Austin Lewis, their head winemaker, they needed to save money. It was the only thing that mattered. But anything they saved, we know what it cost. It cost Genesis Petrio her life. So today I ask that you do the only thing justice demands with your verdict. Find Harper Martini not liable for civil battery. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Turning to the plaintiff, Ms. McCollum, any rebuttal argument?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, please.
I want to start by making something very clear. Members of the jury, you are not here to decide whether or not Peony Estates was negligent. That issue was already decided and dismissed long before today's trial. The only thing you are here to decide is whether or not Harper Martini is liable for battery. Now, despite that, the defense has still tried to convince you that this was all just an accident. But members of the jury, are accidents normally so targeted? You see, it was actually stipulated prior to today's trial that not a single other person who was present at Peony Estates that night suffered any ill effects from pesticide poisoning. It was already stipulated that not a single other item of food or drink present at the wedding rehearsal would test positive for pesticides. So members of the jury, if this is just all one big accident, then what are the odds that it was just one bottle of wine, that it was just one person, and what are the odds that that person was Genesis Petrillo? Members of the jury, the odds are that this was no accident. Find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank